Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. It is June 13th, 2018, and this is episode number 98 of the EdTech Situation Room. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I am the Assistant Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And joining me, as always, is my co-host, Dr. Wes Fryer. Good evening, Wes. How are you tonight?
Good evening, Jason. I'm excited to be able to join tonight from Frisco, Texas, from our cousin's house. And we're down here to go to a wedding, and I'm actually going to duck away to Austin tomorrow to the Learning Festival, which used to be iPad Palooza, and exciting to get to join on the show. So glad that you have established our credibility yet again with the map whose projection name we will reveal at some future date, but perhaps we'll give a special prize to the cartographer who will be able to name it. It is not the Mercator projection. My small knowledge will, allow us to say that. So I am the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School, and boy, excited to talk about a pretty steep lineup of links tonight.
Absolutely so. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time tonight, live via YouTube, or if you're listening to this podcast later on your favorite podcatcher, our notes for every episode are located on our website, edtechsr.com, where you can see not only the topics we talk about each week, but a direct link to all the articles we refer to in making this delightful conversation about educational technology. And I'm going to go ahead and start us off tonight because there is a news we've been talking about for several, months really, and it's come to fruition this past Monday. Net neutrality is officially dead. So as of Monday, net neutrality is no longer something supported by the FCC. It had been eliminated by an earlier vote, and now the rules that protected so-called net neutrality have been eliminated. And so we referred to a couple of articles that I think are worth your time. The CNN article on the topic, and then also a Washington Post article on the topic. And to be super clear, for those of you that are unaware of the net neutrality debate, net neutrality is the notion that every bit is the same, whether it's commercially based or not, which means that in a world where there are gazillions of bits running around at any given second, it is not considered to be a good idea to preference one over the other. So, for example, if one company decides to give preference to a particular bit because it has content that someone else paid them to prioritize, we consider that a violation of so-called net neutrality. And so those rules, which it's a long story, but were solidified, or net neutralities were solidified under the Obama administration, were reversed under the Trump administration FCC, and now we no longer have net neutrality protections from the federal government. Now, I have to say a number of states are either debating or have gone forward with a series of protections for net neutrality. For example, my home state, Montana, Big Sky Country has decided via the governor's office that government contracts will only be issued to companies that promise to protect net neutrality. And in a state like Montana, where we have relatively few broadband vendors, that will make a big difference, I think, into protecting it in our relatively a small state, at least population small state, fourth largest state in the United States area-wise. But it's an important topic for schools, I think, and I think we can have a brief conversation to follow up with our many previous conversations about what that means now. So first, Wes, did you notice at 12:01 a.m. on Monday morning that your internet slowed down dramatically except for advertisements on YouTube?
I did not, and I think, as we've talked about on the show before, we will probably not see dramatic actions like that by the telecoms, because that would lead to a backlash, which they do not want. They want to continue to tell us that this is going to be good for the consumer, maybe even good for competition, whatever. They'll just say good, good, good. And if they were to do something like that, that would, dramatically hurt our Netflix watching or something like that, that might actually lead to a backlash. So I think We're going to see things happen slowly. I didn't drop this article in, but I think AT&T actually just did another rate hike on their unlimited, data plans. And so kind of a gradual, warming of the proverbial frog in the pot. So I did not, and I'm dropping a couple articles in here as well about mergers. This first one is an Ars Technica article. Trump administration fails to block AT&T Time Warner merger, and I actually agree with what the judge said in this case, that the government had just made a real poor case. I think a lot of this had to do with Trump's personal, not liking CNN and that media empire. But the other one I'm dropping in, which is also from Ars, I think these are both today, says Comcast offers $65 billion for Fox as government won't stop merger. So what we're continuing to see, and we'll talk about, the educational implications of this, is the big fish, continuing to get bigger, and basically lobbyists and corporations being able to have their way with politicians, right, with the laws. And so I think it remains to be seen, what the fallout of this is. I think we're both, pretty strong advocates of competition, where T-Mobile families and users enjoy the benefits of having that competitive network out there. But one of the things T-Mobile has said with its Sprint merger, which is expected to go through, is that they need to merge, in order to compete with Verizon and AT&T. So I think that this is sad, but I also think that it is not right for us to be able to have a flip-flop with a government administration. In other words, Congress, as we've talked about, has not acted for net neutrality. They haven't codified that in U.S. law. And so appointed officials at the FCC have been left to make these really, big kinds of determinations, like, are you a Title II or not? And, so we have the flip-flop. So what I would hope is that we would have congressional action. I'm actually very cynical and pessimistic about it. Until we have changes in campaign finance reform, I don't think we're going to, stop the AT&Ts and the Comcasts and the others probably from being able to get their way with legislation, or in this case, it's not legislation, it's with, policies. But I don't think it bodes well for the internet and for schools, but I also don't think we're going to see something dramatically change, this next school year, or maybe even for a while.
Right. Well, that's the complication of this issue, is that it's not as clear cut as your Netflix slows down, right? And one of the reasons why that's the case is because if there was an ability for Netflix to make things faster to you, I think they would invest in the money to do so. I think the biggest risk here are startups that are providing new and interesting and nuanced ways of accessing data on the internet. And then I want to point out one really interesting thing in the Washington Post article that talks about what are the kinds of things that could happen with net neutrality. And they're highlighting a company that's doing discounts on internet services in exchange for you allowing the company to utilize your data and surfing habits to help deliver advertising and build profiles on you. And in this era of, what I'm calling, the technology correction, where privacy is becoming a greater issue for end users, I think people might be more leery of that than they were just a short time ago. But I think we still have to be careful that nothing is worth a $5 discount a month if it violates your privacy or it utilizes your data in an inappropriate way. And I think that's something that we need to be cognizant of, that don't exchange your data for a discount.
And I think that is the number one issue that I do think is really a big deal. And that is that, and I don't know whether this was a law or whether this was just a judge's ruling or what, but ISPs are now able to take any of our data. I think this is what you just said, right? That from the privacy standpoint,
right,
they can take our data and they can resell it and they can do whatever they want to with it. That is an egregious violation of privacy. And this is a major digital citizenship issue. I think we need to all grapple with this in schools. And part of this is how do we help students and then consumers writ large to care about this? Because it really is a big deal. And I don't know if you've been a part at all, Jason, of any kind of litigation discovery or anything like that with regard to email. It can be kind of startling, even if you're not a subject of that, to just see and think about what it means for every single message, for instance, that you've sent on your school network, to suddenly be, in a courtroom, in front of different lawyers, or maybe it's in the newspaper too, but, I think a lot of us continue to have solace in this idea that, oh, and I'm not a criminal, I'm not doing something illegal, I don't have anything to hide. But all of us do have a valid right to privacy. And the fact that ISPs have so much power, that we have such little power as consumers, we really need the new Ralph Nader, the big consumer advocate, to be the digital Ralph Nader. Perhaps this is your role, Jason. Postdoctorate, you can become the digital Ralph Nader for the country. But seriously, we need really strong advocacy that will lead to changes in the law and that will lead to protections of privacy, because absent essentially a populist uprising and the using the tools of democracy to affect change, corporations are going to continue to want to profit off of our money, or off our money, of course, off of our data. Data really is, the gold. It's the gold rush of the 21st century. And certainly there are good trade-offs, and we've talked about that on the show with Google and other companies. I'm pretty happy to have this exchange of being able to enjoy free services for the fact that they're going to monetize my information in some ways. But I think there are limits to, there should be limits to that kind of a Faustian bargain, and we need to be thinking as a society, as Europe is with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. I can say that. They're ahead of us, and I think that we need to have that digital Ralph Nader to step up. And I don't know that person's emerged yet. So there you go. There's your niche postdoctorate.
Nader in the house. So. And I guess the other piece of this that I would note, and then we can jump to maybe less philosophical things, is pay attention, right? Like, this is a critical issue. And one of the things that I think is true, and we're not a politics podcast, so we're not going to get into some of the nitpicky about why this is the case, but there's a lot of hot air in the news right now, right? And the thing about having maybe the term I'll use tonight is a colorful president, is that there is a lot of time spent on serious news programs related to coverage of the Trump administration, and don't let that diminish your view of some of the more subtle things going on in your local, state, or federal government. And especially as they relate to education, some important subtleties may be happening that, the air gets sucked out of the room because of, again, major world events that have importance, but not 75% of the news importance. Monday happened to be the day that net neutrality officially died. It was also the day that they were starting to announce things related to the North Korea-United States summit. And it was pretty hard pressed to find, especially in the first 2 or 3 pages of a newspaper or the first 15 minutes of a radio or television news program, anything except coverage on that summit, whether it was substantive or not. So again, pay attention, and especially if you're teaching English language arts, social studies, government, current events, any of these, helping your students pay attention to these issues and bringing them for discussion in your classroom, whether you have an opinion about it or not, I think is important. It's part of the nature of building a democracy as a primary goal of schools. So please keep this in mind. So luckily, the rest of the links today, we'll probably jump down a privacy data hole a little bit, because that's also a lot in the news. But I do want to highlight some more kind of techie kind of stuff this week too, which there's a lot of interesting things going on. I'm going to start with Chrome OS and Chromebooks. And I was showing Wes before the show. I mentioned this at the end of the show last week, but I'm a ridiculous human being, and I decided that the discounts that were going on, which by the way are still going on, for the basic level Pixelbook, the Generation 3 of the Chrome Chromebook Pixel. I did end up picking up one at a Best Buy on Sunday, and it's just a couple of days old for me, but I can say it's easily the nicest piece of hardware I've ever owned, and the functionality of the device is really quite supreme. And I'll have a more extensive review here in a couple of weeks. And Wes and I are also talking about sometime in July or August having our much advertised, yet to happen Chrome show, where we're going to talk about Chrome OS and both the benefits and maybe the less than desirable effects of the operating system, especially as it relates to education. But there are some interesting things that are going on right now in Chrome world that I think are worthy of notice. For example, Chrome OS version 67 is now released, although I own now a Pixelbook, and it's yet to be released on the Pixelbook, so I would assume it's going to last for a couple of days. And they're starting to create some interesting bits on there. For example, they're moving towards a more flat design, and that's something that Google has been really quite dominant with, is their so-called material design, which utilizes a flat design, as they call it. So it's less fake 3D elements, less skeuomorphism, which is the term that's sometimes utilized by Apple to talk about making a digital something look like the real something. So that's interesting. There's a split screen mode that's interesting. There's also an improved Bluetooth list, which is something that's becoming more important to me since there's nothing but USB-C ports on the Pixelbook. So that's something interesting to happen. And one of the things that I've been thinking about in regards to Chrome OS in particular is the notion that you don't hear about Chromebook OS releases because they are so subtle and in the background. So you may remember that earlier this year we covered the April 2018 version of Windows 10 as it was released, because it was a substantial upgrade in the operating system. Apple announced Mojave, the next version of OS 10, which is in many ways a step forward in the operating system. And you just don't hear much about these releases outside of the kind of Chromebook media, the nerdy folks that write about these things from a more technical standpoint. And one of the reasons why is that it happens in the background. You don't see these updates, and there's a slow, subtle increase in features. And one of the ways that I've seen that most recently is I have what is now a 4-year-old Chromebook. It's a Dell 11 Chromebook. It's a plasticky older Chromebook with an older Intel processor in it and 4 gigs of RAM. And a couple of weeks ago, I rebooted it up. It had been sitting in a box at my office at work for at least a couple of months untouched, and we needed it for a quick piece, and it was 6 or 7 updates behind. And I used the older Chrome operating system as it was updating in the background, and it felt clunky to me. Like it once it updated, it felt much newer and much more nuanced. And that's one of the things I love about Chromebooks, is that they're constantly evolving in the background. And as long as it's supported, and new devices now are supported for 6.5 years after release, which is a very long time, I think, for a laptop operating system to be guaranteed to be updated and provide new features. And
you said 6 years?
6.5 years now is the
yeah,
promise.
That's a big deal. That's a big
and guaranteed on even some of these low-end devices that are sold as modern-day Chromebooks. But I want to highlight that, and there are interesting things in there that subtle things like new zipping features in the Files app and that sort of thing. But just to mention that to start with. The more interesting pieces, however, a couple of new things this week. There is a new dictation mode that's appearing in the so-called Canary channel. You can set, if you have control over your Chromebook, it's not managed by someone else like your IT director, you can set your device to the Canary channel, which is the kind of dangerous, almost broken future version of Chrome OS that they're developing. It's often updated daily. And there's now a voice-to-text feature, dictation feature, that's going to be part of the Chrome operating system. And early reviews suggest that it's fairly stable and already pretty polished, even though this is probably months away from rolling out. And Wes, I know you on iOS devices like to use the dictation feature to send things like emails and text messages. Does that change? Well, not that you have a negative view of Chromebooks, like you Chromebook haters. Is that something that would tempt you to spend more time on the Chrome operating system?
Well, I mean, not that specifically. I mean, the biggest things that tempt me with Chrome are the same things that have been a draw forever. You know, booting in 8 seconds, virtually no malware and security issues. The ease with which it can be supported both as a home user, and at school as an IT director. So I don't know how many folks listening to this podcast are their families' IT director, but I helped one of our daughters update her laptop, and she was still running Mac OS Yosemite, which is like 3 versions back, and I just felt like the terrible father there. But with Chrome, that's not going to be a problem, because you're going to have auto updates. They're going to happen so quickly. So I think the dictation is definitely a big thing. We have been looking at school at Read Write for Google. It's a set of tools that enable a whole host of accessibility options, from yes, being able to dictate, but being able to have a visual dictionary. Just in terms of students needing help with English, or just wanting to use speech to text, and being able. We tend to think today still, I think, and be sort of biased towards keyboarding, and I think keyboarding still is important, but we shouldn't make the mistake of saying to young kids everywhere, you just got to get your keyboarding perfect, because that's the only way you're gonna ever get content onto one of these things. I mean, it's not. We're gonna have neural brain implants in the next 20 years, but in the next 5 to 10, the speech to text is just going to continue to grow by leaps and bounds. So I definitely think this is a place that Google is continuing to excel and to stand out. I'm really excited. My wife is waving on the show there. One of the other articles you dropped into that series was about Windows 10. This is 9 to 5 Google on June 13th. Google appears to be working on Windows 10 certification for the Pixel Book. And think about that. I mean, if you needed to, you can do.
Yes.
Mac users have been able to do this for quite a while. Originally, not officially, and then Boot Camp was introduced by Apple, so you could officially boot into Windows. And so
right.
I think the landscape. We are going from a security standpoint. We have to see change, right? I mean, our legacy operating systems are so buggy and so bloated that when you look at what Google has been able to do with Chrome starting over, this is what I think Microsoft is really trying to do with Windows, is figure out how they're going to have a much cleaner and less security prone and easier to update version of itself. And so from a school standpoint, as a school tech director, we just rolled out a new phone system. I'll talk about that in Geeks of the Week. We just got to have a lot going on this summer. So we're not rolling out new laptops to faculty this summer, but early in the fall, hopefully, we're going to do that. And I want to take a more serious look than ever at Chromebooks, particularly one of the groups that we refresh, and we do this on a 5-year cycle, are our primary teachers that are our pre-K and kindergarten teachers. They actually don't plug their computers into projection, so they don't need AirPlay. And so it remains to be seen how all that plays out. But I just know, Chrome is a revolution. I mean, it is truly a game changer to the point where, and it's not to tell, administrators, I don't need more help. We don't need more hands on deck in the IT office. We're not saying that. But I am going to say that with the same amount of resources, I can support, far more Chromebooks than I can any other operating system. And the fact that they're so reliable, they're cloud managed, and I think we'll do a show about this in July, and we will just pull out all the stops, because if you are not looking at Chrome, and if you are not weighing advantages to those kinds of management features, I think that you are probably not doing your due diligence. And I'm not saying everybody needs to change, and I'm not saying that everyone running a different platform is out to lunch, but I am saying if you have a chance to experience the difference, it's so jarring and dramatic. I don't think you can just ignore it, because it is a glimpse into the future of where we're going to be with enterprise computing and even home computing, as the home IT guy too.
Absolutely so. And I would say that there's a lot of exciting things about Chromebooks, but the availability now of, sorry, I've got a cat in my view here. The availability of Android apps is really revolutionary on the Chrome platform. There's now a method to install Linux-based apps, so full desktop-style apps for those that are a little more savvy and want to provide, more enterprise level software. There's potentially Windows apps and containers, which we've talked about in the past in the podcast. There's just a lot of exciting things, I think, happening in Chrome world. And, I'm glad to hear we'll talk about this in greater detail later. But, the other piece about this too is that, what I like about some of the high-end Chrome hardware, and when I say high-end, like obviously I've purchased a nice Chromebook, but there is a possibility, I think, of we've talked about in previous weeks, manufacturers like HP and Acer are looking towards what I would call like a mid-range Chromebook. That's something that has something that's a little more robust than the lower-end Intel chips or the ARM chips and have 8 gigabytes, even 16 gigabytes of memory. Those can be power user machines where you could have dozens of windows open, 4 or 5 applications. With Android apps evolving pretty quickly, those apps could be very functional. I've been playing around with, I think it's WeVideo on the Android platform, which is a very basic video editor. It's not bad on the Chromebook, especially with
it's come a long way. I did a workshop on it last summer. It's come a long way.
And that all those things together make these really not only consumption machines, where obviously that they have to be able to consume media, but the goal, I think, of most technology integrators, including the two that host this podcast, is we want kids to create with these devices too. And if that's the case, then I think Chromebooks can do that. And so if you can match up a decent platform that saves, or that you can get IT to buy into, that's relatively inexpensive and focuses more on the user experience than it does in having infinitely powerful workstation style laptop for every student, which is just not necessary. I think there's something there. So, but then again, I mean, to be super clear, I don't think either Wes or I would ever advocate for there's one device to rule them all. In fact, the best classrooms have a mix of mobile devices, tablet devices, laptop style devices, maybe even a couple of managed Macs or PCs in the classroom that could do some more advanced things. But it's all those things together that make a magical mix for all. But Chromebooks are pretty exciting stuff.
And I'd like to segue that, if we could, to the Apple articles, because since our last show, I did watch the full 2-hour keynote on my Apple TV, Apple Events app. And we've got a host of different articles here under the subtitle of This Week in Apple Hand-Wringing. Two of the things quickly that I was excited about and hadn't picked up on until I watched the keynote and then found some articles is that group FaceTime. So I don't know how you're going to have 32 people in a FaceTime chat, but that's a pretty big deal. I think, isn't Google Hangouts still limited to 10?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, and so anyway, Apple tends to wait until they can do technology really, really well. And so I guess with bandwidth as well as processors and everything like that, they're at the point where feeling like more than 2 people in a FaceTime chat can happen. The other thing I'm really excited about as a science and space geek is the aerials from the International Space Station. So one of the coolest parts of Apple TV, if you opt for this on your screensaver, it's fun to connect it to your own personal photos. Or we've had experiments at school, having a channel and having school pictures come up. But they have these moving screensavers, which they call aerials, and I think one of them is Hong Kong. But they've got, glaciers, icebergs, different things. Well, they worked with the astronauts on the International Space Station, and it looks like some really stunning images that they've put up. And so when you're not using your Apple TV, you just press menu to go back. You can default to this moving, panorama. And on that note, I'll say that, and I think maybe I said it last week, the screen that they had at that keynote was just stunning. So those were a couple of small things that were exciting to me and I'm looking forward to. But overall, the biggest news is really not news yet. This is the developer conference, but they're talking about the Mac OS and iOS. And they're talking about something called the substrata. And so they are not saying that iOS is becoming Mac OS, but they are, from a development standpoint, making that substrata much more similar, so that developers are going to have an easier job porting their apps from one to the other. And I would suspect that Apple is taking some notes from where Google is going with its Chrome and its Android operating systems, which again is not to a complete merge, but it definitely is further, more mature on the Chrome side, where if you have certain Chromebook platforms today, you can access the Google Play Store, you can run Android apps, and it's not perfect, but there's a lot of really good things with the smartphone ecosystem in terms of app functionality. I think sandboxing, the ways that things are contained, and just also from a developer standpoint, it's going to vary. It's not going to be sensible in every case. But I think that is significant, and it's going to be very interesting, especially to see what, if anything, Apple does with its Hinge, with the touchscreen, and if we end up having this kind of hybrid device that Apple, eventually sells us with some kind of an ultra thin, iPad-esque, or it is an iPad that's the screen, and you fold that off. So developer conferences perhaps tend to be a little less exciting to the consumer because hardware, in this case, wasn't at all a part. Doesn't tend to get the emphasis that it does at other events. But I think amidst those small announcements, the substrata and the unifying of those base elements of iOS and macOS is a pretty big deal for everybody.
Absolutely so. And I would also note that I find it very exciting, this notion that there could be an easy way for developers to take their iOS applications and put it on Mac. I think the notion of, in fact, that's one of the reasons why I was a little sad that I, at least from a mobile standpoint, I use an iMac at work, but the App Store on the Mac, I think, is a revelation when it comes to providing you access to what I would call like little unitasker apps, right? Like things that do one thing really well. There's a couple apps, a couple of them that I purchased because the $1 or $2 I paid for them was worth it, seeing other people reviewing the app and telling me it was worth it. But things that are, image resizers that instantly turns it into a certain size, or image size decreasers, or particular notepad apps or FTP apps, or things that I can know and trust. And when I go onto, or when I refresh a Mac, as I tend to do every 6 to 8 months with every machine I own, just wipe the operating system and start over again. It's easy for me to go into that app store and say, here's all the apps I've downloaded and purchased in the past. Download this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then my app comes back into place. And it's I would say that the Android apps on the Chrome OS is a little clunky still. It's better on the Google platforms than they are on some of the other manufacturers' platforms, because Google's, I think, spent more development time, obviously, on their own hardware when they were rolling out Android apps. But the fact that you get access to all these like interesting little apps that do little one and two off things, I think is really great. And in fact, on Microsoft, that has an app store that works the same way now on Windows 10. That's also great. It's just a shame there's not a whole lot of apps in the Windows 10 store in comparison to the iOS App Store or the Android Play Store, but still a great move on the part of Apple. And I would like to mention one other article that I threw in about that the TechCrunch, I believe, was the onus of the article. Oh, I'm sorry, it was Philip Elmore DeWitt that noted on the day of the releases last week that he talked to some developers, basically at the food court to talk about, and he felt that the developers' response to these things was pretty meh. And it may be so, but, I felt some life in Apple last week. I think hardware will make more of a difference than software this year, but I thought there was a lot of exciting things, interesting things in those announcements.
I'll throw the glove down to you, Jason, as well as anyone else listening, to try and keep me in the Android fold, because I was very energized by what I saw with iOS. I am extremely frustrated at not being able to update my operating system.
Yes.
And so, if I do stick with an Android phone, my next iteration hopefully is going to be stock Android with either Pixel or something that is upgradable, and something that apparently, and I guess the Pixel for sure, Google's going to do that. There's some question about other kinds of platforms, but I was very energized, and it's just, the Apple, again, people want to count them out, and just I'm very, very glad to have had so much experience with Android, and I'm not saying for sure that I'm walking away from the platform, but Apple has and continues to do some wonderful hardware and software and put those together, and Google with the Pixel, both Chromebook that you're experiencing now as well as with the Pixel phones, is recognizing, I think, the benefits of controlling hardware as well as software and being able to really shape that experience.
Right.
So I hope that we're going to find a way in the Android ecosystem to escape the tyranny of the ISPs that are putting their bloatware and their garbage on the phone that just is freaking ridiculous to me. And then also this idea that, the Motorola folks are going to say, no, we think you'll just stick with, that two operating systems old version. It's very maddening. And I guess I'm spoiled as an iOS user. I mean, usually I would wait a little bit before upgrading, because especially lately that there's been some different issues with them, but being able to get the latest operating system, like you said, with Chrome, sometimes that can breathe new life into your device. And anyway, it's, Apple is continuing to innovate. And I predict, I'll go on the show saying this, I predict that in the next year or so, we're going to see a dramatic innovation from Apple that is going to be a big difference from what they're doing now with the iPad line and the MacBook Pro line. I think we're gonna see them innovate in some way, and perhaps that's going to be copying Surface Book Hinge, and that kind of a Microsoft model, where it's going to be something more convertible. But I don't think Apple is just going to sit still and not innovate more in the platform space, and so that's going to be exciting. So
absolutely. So, okay, let's see here. Let's quickly talk about, to balance things out, a couple of interesting things on the Windows side. The first one is that Microsoft is apparently redesigning the so-called Surface or Surface Pro, which is their kind of tablet convertible that seems to be the crux of most of the exciting hardware that Microsoft's producing, and they will be releasing a new design in 2019. And I know a lot of very happy Surface owners. I know a Surface owner or two that's not totally thrilled, but generally speaking, the folks that I know that are Surface owners are pretty happy folks, and so I'm hoping that Microsoft can continue to evolve that product. The one frustration I had with as a Surface user, and I was one very briefly, was that, and I have access to a Surface Book at work, but the actual Surface tablet it would never work on my lap. That was the only thing that stopped me from wanting to that as a daily carry, is that I'm sometimes in away from a desk enough that having access to a something that can sit comfortably on my lap as I am on an airplane, or quickly typing thing in an airport, that sort of thing has been a piece there. But interesting things happening there. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is that it feels like Microsoft's starting to put some attention into the Office platform again. Obviously, they've been moving pretty heavily towards web-based applications, and that's what is chiefly available cheaply at schools now, is the so-called Office 365 on the web, which has a lot of functionality to it. But I am excited to see Microsoft move in the direction to where they're starting to reconsider their design, and make it a more flat design, which is a design element that I think is very positive. And I will tell you, having accessed it a couple of times this week, I do have access to Android Microsoft apps on my Chromebook or my Pixel Book, but the web-based Word and web-based Excel, both of which I had an opportunity to use in context of work this week, look pretty great on the Pixel Book. And so if they can continue to work on that, I think that's a very positive thing.
Do Excel users run into the same kinds of issues opening up an Excel document on 365 in the cloud as they do Google Sheets on the cloud?
No, I don't. I think they run into the same stuff, and that's where
they do or don't.
They do not. So to make it clear, the Office Excel is better at that than Sheets on the Google piece. Now, I have to say, I exclusively use Sheets at work, and maybe 99% of the time use Google Sheets at work as opposed to either desktop or Office Excel, because I'm starting to become kind of proficient at doing the same kind of advanced stuff that I used to do in Excel on the desktop application. It's not quite, well, actually, it's not even close to the desktop version, right? Because the super number crunching stuff, like, for example, the data analysis stuff that you can do in Excel, the desktop version of Excel, the web-based version is not even close. But I feel like they're making progress there. And I have actually a lot of teacher friends and colleagues that are in Office 365 districts that maybe briefly flirted with Google Drive and the Office Suite, or the G Suite for schools. And then an IT director came in that was more comfortable with the Microsoft platform. I would say that I'm getting a lot of indication that those that preferred Google before are starting to find some parity with the web-based versions of Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. But I think some design precepts to add a simple interface to that. I think one of the things that was an early Microsoft goal was to make it look like the desktop apps as much as possible. And there's some merit to that, I think, when people are transitioning from the desktop app to the web-based app. But a flatter design, a simpler design, probably a faster design too, if you start to measure some of the ways that you can objectively measure the speed of web pages, a simpler design there is going to be better. So it appears that those particular platforms are evolving.
Quick sidebar on that. I have not been eager, and still am not eager, to support both 365 as well as Google. We've been a Google school for 7 or 8 years. I should know that exact number. But Microsoft is the gateway drug, Minecraft is Microsoft's gateway drug for schools. And that is going to be partially successful for us this summer. 3 years ago, when I came to our school, one of the things I was able to purchase was licenses for Microsoft EDU, just as they were being sold to Microsoft, and before that was discontinued. And so we've used those licenses for the last 3 years, knowing that we're at version 1.8 or whatever, and we're being left by the new innovations and iterations. And so we're having some staffing changes, and our new makerspace and middle school computer teacher is really on fire for the new Minecraft education version. And so what that is going, I think, to push us to do this summer is to go ahead and activate that 365 free tier. And then, we have to do that in order to hand out the Minecraft EDU licenses to students. So anyway, I'm going to have a little bit more knowledge about that. And that's why I was asking the Excel question, because theoretically we could, offer teachers the opportunity to work in that 365 cloud environment and not incur any additional costs, because that free tier that just gives you the cloud-based versions, not the downloadable client versions, is entirely free for Microsoft at this point. So anyway, it's going to be interesting. What I'm most interested in for all of that is just for Minecraft education and seeing that happen. But it's we're perhaps like some other schools, and not having been super excited to jump on the annual subscription train with Adobe, with Microsoft, with so many different companies. And, at some point that train's left the station, and from a security standpoint, you simply can't continue to run these older licensed versions of the software that you have. You're going to have to step up and move forward with some licensing. So,
yep, absolutely.
Anyway,
so
that was a long sidebar.
Oh, by the way, kind of an update related to that Adobe piece. I did get Adobe Spark added to our domain, the free Spark for education. Yes. And although I'm having a bizarre problem right now, where the last 3 times over the last 48 hours I've tried to get into it, I get to the login page and none of the buttons work. So I don't know if that's me or others. So I'm going to have to ping some other people in our office tomorrow to find out that's happening. But that Spark product, we reported back on the podcast 3 or 4 weeks ago that Adobe Spark K-12 is now available for free to any K-12 institution, and you can set it up to where either any address from your domain is automatically qualified for that, or we're going to do it in kind of a named license model to where we're going to start with just our teachers and administrators and give them access to the web-based Adobe Spark platform. But that is an exciting piece, and now set up at the Montana Digital Academy.
Awesome. And I so appreciate you mentioning that, Jason, because that's an example of something that I totally want to do. I'll put that on our list of summer projects. We've got a few more things to do than we've got hands and hours for. But,
Here.
Spark is just phenomenal. Being able to create info pics, being able to create digital stories. Adobe has, in fact, they had a prominent part in the beginning of the Apple keynote as well. So they are continuing to be creative players. And yes, if you haven't had that installed at your school and you're not in the position to do it yourself as the IT director, that's something to request and to say, hey, I heard that we can do this free Adobe Spark for Education, and the doors that can open, particularly for users that are under 13, because that's been a challenge. And what Adobe has told elementary teachers is, formally, have your tech department create an email address, and then you can use that address for your kids to log in. But now that they've got this whole education platform, my understanding is, with Google Apps and everything, that single sign-on will just be able to use those Google accounts. And
and that's how it's definitely able to be set up, and so it's great. So, and quite functional. I prefer Canva slightly to Adobe Spark because I started on Canva. Canva was my first web-based I guess image manipulator or advanced graphic maker, but now that the advanced version is available for free for my context and my day job, I might end up moving that there. So
okay.
So we're starting to run out of time here, Wes. Is there anything else you want to jump on this week?
Just two fast ones. FCC accused of spreading lies about DDoS hitting comment system. This was Ars Technica back on June the 6th, talking about net neutrality and all of that. Of course, John Oliver, not safe for work, not safe to watch in front of the kids. So be careful if you watch that, because they've got a screenshot. And I think he was he's been the cause, his show, of just tons and tons of comments. And basically what it appears is that the FCC, was saying that they were the subjects of a denial of service attack. And indeed, it very well could have just been all the fans of John Oliver who were putting, comments into the system. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And it's also sad because there's really not any good news on that front, in my opinion, as far as FCC and net neutrality, what's happening there. But then the other real quick one, is just an Elon Musk article. I think we had a couple, but this one was Ars Technica on June 6th. Musk promises manufacturing self-driving battery breakthroughs and profits. I think the profits one is probably really big. The Model 3 is Tesla's general production model, which they have forecast is going to hit mainstream and really explode. And so in the article, they say that they are hitting the production of 500 cars a day or 3,500 a week. And so he's predicting their profitability by Q3 2018, generating positive cash flow by Q4. Now, Musk is also known for being very optimistic and, saying that things are going to happen and they're happen bigger. But there's a heck of a lot in this article in terms of not only Tesla and the Model 3, but battery factories, autopilot. Musk is somebody that we need our kids to know who he is and what he's doing. I have listened to his biography, and much like Steve Jobs, socially and on the family front, perhaps not the most successful person ever, and person that we all should aspire to be exactly like. But on the entrepreneurial side and in terms of tackling grand challenges and being a real technology disruptor, he is absolutely near the top of the list. He's also interesting in his use of Twitter, and I don't have this article in there, but there have been people pretty upset at the way he uses his Twitter power. And anyway, he's certainly an interesting figure, but there's some important conversations to have with students about technologies, about the roles those are playing in society, and the ways in which things are being disrupted. So that's a good article with some eyebrow-raising statements that he made at the recent shareholder meeting.
Right. And I would also note that whatever progress Mr. Musk makes on Tesla batteries is going to eventually also make progress in other battery related items. And so there's been a long rumor that Apple, for example, has been working on some battery technology evolutions. I know Google has got a lot of money invested in batteries. There's a lot of startup money in batteries, but I'm cheering Elon on, not just because I would like to drive a Tesla, because I would, although my pay grade does not afford me the luxuries of a Tesla. At the same time, the work they're doing there to make car batteries better is inevitably going to make a big difference as it relates to batteries in our everyday devices. And there's something we don't talk a lot about it a lot here on the podcast, but one of the things that's very true is that the broader perspective of energy, and this is a massive rabbit hole we could jump down with, where your energy comes from. Is it petroleum based? Is it renewably based? Blah, 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 blah. It's a huge rabbit hole. But one thing we can do is make batteries more efficient and have them store more, so we could take things like renewable energy where storage is a big deal. A good example of that is solar, right? The sun is not a 24-hour day phenomenon in most places around the earth in any given time. So you need to be able to store the energy that you're being able to capture from the sun when it's available. And if we could have big, long-lasting but thin and small batteries to power our devices, that's a pretty amazing thing. So I always click on an Elon Musk article that relates to batteries, because I really think that the efforts that he's making there with the Tesla, and then bring in all the other startups and people working on the battery issue, that's an important piece of your tech savvy in 2018.
Sounds good. Shall we Geek of the Weekend?
Sure. I'll start quickly. I just want to note something. It was almost news for me in regards to the podcast, but we've spoken in the past about the Note to Self podcast, Manoush Zomorodi's podcast at WNYC, and she announced last week that she is leaving WNYC and starting up her own podcasting company. And details are sketchy at this point, but Jen Poignant, who I think was the executive producer of her podcast, and Manoush are leaving to start their own podcast called the Zigzag Podcast. And it's the Zigzag Podcast may be kind of like startup on Gimlet Media, in that they're going to talk about starting their own podcast company, and there's a heavy overtone of entrepreneurship, and in this case it would be a women-run and controlled and startup company, which I think is very exciting. But I have a lot of admiration for Manoush Zomorodi. I find her to be an important voice in 2018 when it comes to loving technology, but understanding there needs to be limits to it, and a smart, thoughtful approach to that. So her new podcast, the Zigzag Podcast, which is co-hosted by Jen Poignant, starts tomorrow. So I've already downloaded, or I've already subscribed to it on Pocket Cast, which is my preferred podcast catcher, and I'm excited to hear it, because I think if it's is even partially as great as the promise of those two media producers, it's going to be something really special. So information in the show notes, or you can just search for Zigzag Podcast. I believe that for sure it's in the Apple Podcast directory, and I found it on Pocket Casts.
Awesome. And I will, I don't know, either abuse my co-host power or just overshare, but 3 quick geeks of the week. One's for Peggy George, and shout out to both Peggy and Marta, who are in our chat room tonight. Shout out for Classroom 2.0 Live, the last show of the year. It is this Saturday, June the 16th, and it is called Your Summer Bucket List. What is on it? And so I've got a link to that Google document, and it's an open mic show. So anybody can take the mic and talk about either summer professional development, books you're going to read, certifications you're doing, just what kinds of things are you doing for your summer professional development. If you're not a frequent listener and participant in Classroom 2.0 Live, you definitely need to check that out on Saturday mornings, North America time. Also a link to Make Media Camp. Looks like that hopefully we're going to pull off 4 different sessions. The quickest ones would be in Seattle, but have had, thanks to Jason, some nice contacts and shooting to have a session at the end of the month. But I'm also going to try for one in Kansas City, in Oklahoma City, and then in the Dallas area. So you can check that out on Twitter at Make Media Camp. That's a 1-day sort of cross-platform version of the iPad Media Camp. And lastly, my shout out is to Jive Voice, which is a voice over IP cloud-hosted phone system. For the last year, I've been working with our tech team to prepare for today. Today was the day we actually, switched over, ported over our analog Mitel PRI lines, which were mid-1990s, and went over to the Cisco phone system, and it is a cloud-hosted system provided by Jive. And so, anyway, it has been a very hectic, not only week of getting those phones out and having the switch over today, but also just everything that is involved in getting that kind of thing set up for our school. So very happy with Jive and excited to be working with them, and might report a little bit later on that. But those are the Geeks of the Week, and if you want to get to the articles we didn't talk about tonight, you can get to those as well on edtechsr.com/links. Jason, where can we find you when you're not pontificating and sharing, especially the Google goodness here on the EdTech situation?
Well, and I do pontificate a lot, actually. You should just ask my staff at the Digital Academy. So I am on the Twitters at TechSavvyTeach. I am also a blogger for the Northwest Council for Computer Education Tech Savvy Teacher blog, blogged at ncc.org. And I'm continuing to work on a series of articles. My free time has not produced much yet because I keep getting excited by new projects, but I am working on some interesting new articles, and I'm really trying to help spread the word that particularly online learners, but I think any user of technology, that you can take the simple tools in your life, and the one that I think about the most is the browser, and set it up to really make it a powerful tool in your life and not just a passive piece of software that is a window to the internet. It can really be something more than that. So look for that either via Twitter or at the NCC Tech Savvy Teacher blog. What about you, Wes?
I am W. Fryer on Twitter. I'll be blowing up Twitter tomorrow at the Learning Festival with Carl Hooker down in Austin, and I am periodically posting podcasts on speed of creativity as well as some blogs.
Excellent. Well, this here, for those of you that haven't figured it out yet, this is the EdTech Situation Room podcast, and we're here weekly on Wednesday nights. It is usually at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central, or I think we've decided it's 3 a.m. UTC, or may jump around with the various time zone changes that happen in the United States. But if you don't catch us live, and we do tweet out at our Twitter channel, EdTechSR, about live shows, so you can jump into the chat room and chat with both hosts and our weekly guests there. You can always find us where better podcasts are aggregated, which includes the iTunes podcast directory, Pocket Casts, and in fact, the last 3 or 4 experimental apps I've downloaded on Android, we've appeared there. So just type in EdTechSR into your favorite podcast app, and you can get it delivered to you each week. Or you can go to our website where you can download tiny MP3s of it if you prefer to listen to it that way, or just look at our show notes, which we do spend a lot of time on each week, so that you don't have to just trust our word for it. You can go to the original source and make judgments for yourself. Until next time, we hope you have a great week, and we look forward to talking next time on the EdTech Situation Room.